Chapter 7. Late that night, or rather very early the following morning, Senator Morgan and his number 1 secretary were closeted in the former's doubly spy-ray-proofed office. Morgan's round, heavy, florid face had perhaps lost a little of its usual color. The fingers of his left hand drummed soundlessly upon the glass top of his desk. His shrewd gray eyes, however, were as keen and as calculating as ever. "This thing smells, Herkimer. It reeks. But I can't figure any of the angles. That operation was planned. Sure fire. It couldn't miss. Right up to the last split second, it worked perfectly. Then blooey. A flat bust. The patrol landed and everything was under control. There must have been a leak somewhere. But where in hell could it have been?" "There couldn't have been a leak, Chief. It doesn't make sense." The secretary uncrossed his legs, recrossed them in the other direction, threw away a half-smoked cigarette, lit another. "If there'd been any kind of a leak, they would have done a lot more than just kill the low man on the ladder. You know as well as I do that Rocky Kinnison is the hardest-boiled character this side of hell. If he had known anything, he would have killed everybody in sight, including you and me. Besides, if there had been a leak, he would not have let Samms get within 10,000 miles of the place. That's one sure thing. Another is he wouldn't have waited until after it was all over to get his army there. No, Chief, there couldn't have been a leak. Whatever Samms or Kinnison found out, probably Samms, he's a hell of a lot smarter than Kinnison is, you know, he learned right there and then. He must have seen Brainerd start to pull his gun." "I thought of that. I'd buy it, except for one fact. Apparently, you didn't time the interval between the shots and the arrival of the tanks." "Sorry, Chief." Herkimer's face was a study in chagrin. "I made a bad slip there." "I'll say you did. 1 minute and 58 seconds. "What?" Morgan remained silent. "The patrol is fast, of course, and always ready, and they would yank the stuff in on tractor beams, not under their own power. But even so, 5 minutes is my guess, Chief. 4.5 absolute minimum." "Check. And where do you go from there?" "I see your point. I don't. That blows everything wide open. One set of facts says there was a leak, which occurred between 2.5 and 3 minutes before the signal was given. I ask you, Chief, does that make sense?" "No. That's what is bothering me. As you say, the facts seem to be contradictory. Somebody must have learned something before anything happened. But if they did, why didn't they do more? And Murgatroyd, if they didn't know about him, why the ships, especially the big battle wagons? If they did think he might be out there somewhere, why didn't they go and find out? Now, I'll ask one. Why didn't our Mr. Murgatroyd do something? Or wasn't the pirate fleet supposed to be in on this? Probably not, though. My guess would be the same as yours. Can't see any reason for having a fleet cover a one-man operation, especially as well-planned a one as this was. But that's none of our business. These Lensmen are. I was watching them every second. Neither Samms nor Kinnison did anything whatever during that 2 minutes. Young Kinnison and Northrop each left the hull about that time. I know it, so they did. Either one of them could have called the patrol. But what has that to do with the price of beef CIF Valeria? Herkimer refrained tactfully from answering the savage question. Morgan drummed and thought for minutes, then went on slowly. There are 2 and only 2 possibilities, neither of which seem even remotely possible. It must have been, either the lens or the girl. The girl? Act your age, Senator. I know where she was and what she was doing every second. That was evident. Morgan stopped drumming and smiled cynically. I'm getting a hell of a kick out of seeing you taking it for a change, instead of dishing it out. Yes? Herkimer's handsome face hardened. That game isn't over, my friend. That's what you think, the senator jibed. Can't believe that any woman can be Herkimer-proof, eh? You've been working on her for 6 weeks now, instead of the usual 6 hours, and you haven't got anywhere yet." "I will, Senator." Herkimer's nostrils flared viciously. "I'll get her, one way or another, if it's the last thing I ever do. And I'll give you 8 to 5 you don't, and a 6-month time limit." "I'll take 5,000 of that. But what makes you think that she's anything to be afraid of? She's a trained psychologist, yes, but so am I, and I'm older and more experienced than she is. That leaves that yoga stuff, her learning how to sit cross-legged, how to contemplate her navel, and how to try to get in tune with the infinite. How do you figure that puts her in my class?" "I told you I don't. Nothing makes sense. But she is Virgil Samms' daughter." "What of it? You didn't gag on George Olmsted. You picked him yourself for one of the toughest jobs we've got. By blood, he's just about as close to Virgil Samms as Virgilia is. They might as well have been hatched out of the same egg. Physically, yes. Mentally and psychologically, no. Olmsted is a realist, a materialist. He wants his reward in this world, not the next, and is out to get it. Furthermore, the job will probably kill him, and even if it doesn't, he will never be in a position of trust, or where he can learn much of anything. On the other hand, Virgil Samms is. But I don't need to tell you what he is like. But you don't seem to realize that she's just like him. She isn't playing around with you because of your overpowering charm." "Listen, Chief. She didn't know anything, and she didn't do anything. I was dancing with her all the time, as close as that." He clasped his hands together tightly. "So I know what I'm talking about. And if you think she could ever learn anything from me, skip it. You know that nobody on Earth or anywhere else can read my face. And besides, she was playing coy right then, wasn't even looking at me. So count her out." "We'll have to, I guess." Morgan resumed his quiet drumming. "If there were any possibility that she pumped you, I'd send you to the mines. But there's no sign. That leaves the lens. It has seemed, right along, more logical than the girl, but a lot more fantastic. Been able to find out anything more about it?" "No, just what they've been advertising. Combination radiophone, automatic language converter, telepath, and so on. Badge of the top skimmings of the top bracket cops. But I began to think, out there on the floor, that they aren't advertising everything they know." "So did I. You tell me." "Take the time 0 minus 3 minutes. Besides the 5 Lensmen and Jill Samms, the place was full of top brass, scrambled eggs all over the floor. Commodores and lieutenant commodores from all continental governments of the Earth, the other planets, and the colonies, all wearing full-dress sidearms. Nobody knew anything then. We agree on that. But within the next few seconds, somebody found out something and called for help. One of the lensmen could possibly have done that without showing signs. But at 0 time, all 4 lensmen had their guns out, and not Lewiston's, please note, and were shooting, whereas none of the other armed officers knew that anything was going on until after it was all over. That puts the finger on the lens." "That's the way I figured it. But the difficulties remain unchanged. How? Mind reading?" "Space drift," Herkimer snorted. "My mind can't be read." "Nor mine. And besides, if they could read minds, they wouldn't have waited until the last possible split second to do it, unless— Say, wait a minute. Did Brainerd act or look nervous toward the last? I wasn't to look at him, you know." "Not nervous exactly, but he did get a little tense." "There you are, then. Hired murderers aren't smart. A lensman saw him tighten up and got suspicious. Turned in the alarm on general principles. Warned the others to keep on their toes. But even so, it doesn't look like mind reading. They'd have killed him sooner. They were watchful and mighty quick on the draw." "That could be it. That's about as thin and as specious an explanation as I ever saw cooked up. but it does cover the facts, and the two of us will be able to make it stick. But take notice, pretty boy, that certain parties are not going to like this at all. In fact, they are going to be very highly put out. That's a nice hunk of understatement, boss. But notice one beautiful thing about this story. Herkimer grinned maliciously. It lets us pass the buck to Big Jim Town. We can be, and will be, sore as hell because he picked such weak sister characters to do his killings. In the heavily armored, improvised ambulance, Virgil Samms sat up and directed a thought at his friend Kinnison, finding his mind a turmoil of confusion. "What's the matter, Rod?" "Plenty," the big lensman snapped back. "They were, maybe still are, too damn far ahead of us. Something has been going on that we haven't even suspected. I stood by, as innocent as a 3-year-old girl baby, and let you walk right into that one, and I emphatically do not enjoy getting caught with my pants down that way. It makes me jumpy. This may be all, but it may not be, not by 11,000 light-years, and I'm trying to dope out what is going to happen next." "And what have you deduced?" "Nothing. I'm stuck. So I'm tossing it into your lap. Besides, that's what you're getting paid for, thinking. So go ahead and think. What would you be doing if you were on the other side?" "I see. You think, then, that it might not be good technique to take the time to go back to the spaceport?" "You get the idea. But can you stand transfer?" "Certainly. They got my shoulder dressed and taped, and my arm in a sling. Shock practically all gone. Some pain, but not much. I can walk without falling down." "Fair enough. Clayton." He lensed a vigorous thought. "Have any of the observers spotted anything, high up or far off?" "No, sir." "Good. Kinnison to Commodore Clayton. Orders. Have a copter come down and pick up Samms and myself on tractors. Instruct the Boise and the cruisers to maintain utmost vigilance. Instruct the Chicago to pick us up. Detach the Chicago and the Boise from your task force. Assign them to me. Off." "Clayton to Commissioner Kinnison. Orders received and are being carried out. Off." The transfers were made without incident. The two super-dreadnoughts leapt into the high stratosphere and tore westward. Halfway to the hill, Kinnison called Dr. Frederick Rodebush. "Fred, Kinnison, have Cleve and Bergenholm link up with us. Now, how are the Geigers on the outside of the hill behaving?" "Normal, all of them," the physicist Lensman reported after a moment. "Why?" Kinnison detailed the happenings of the recent past. "So tell the boys to unlimber all the stuff the hill has got." "My God!" Cleveland exclaimed. "Why, that's putting us back to the days of the interplanetary wars." "With one notable exception," Kinnison pointed out. "The attack, if any, will be strictly modern. I hope we'll be able to handle it. One good thing, the old mountain's got a lot of sheer mass. How much radioactivity will it stand?" "Allotropic iron, U-235, or plutonium?" Rodebush seized his slide rule. "What difference does it make?" "From a practical standpoint, perhaps none. But with a task force defending, not many bombs could get through. So I'd say I wasn't thinking so much of bombs." "What then?" "Isotopes. A good thick blanket of dust. Slow speed, fine stuff that neither our ships nor the hill's screens could handle. We've got to decide first whether Virgil will be safer there in the hill or out in space in the Chicago, and second, for how long." "I see. I'd say here under the hill. Months, perhaps years, before anything could work down this far. And we can always get out. No matter how hot the surface gets, we've got enough screens, heavy water, cadmium, lead, mercury, and everything else necessary to get him out through the locks." "That's what I was hoping you'd say. And now, about the defense. I wonder. I don't want everybody to think I've gone completely hysterical, but I'll be damned if I want to get caught again with—" His thought faded out. "May I offer a suggestion, sir?" Bergenholm's thought broke the prolonged silence. "I'd be very glad to have it. Your suggestions so far haven't been idle vaporings. Another hunch?" "No, sir. A logical procedure. It has been some months since the last emergency call-out drill was held. If you issue such another call now and nothing happens, it can be simply another surprise drill, with credit, promotion, and monetary rewards for the best performances, further practice and instruction for the less proficient units." "Splendid, Dr. Bergenholm." Sam's brilliant and agile mind snatched up the thought and carried it along. "And what a chance, Rod, for something vastly larger and more important than a Continental or even a Tellurian drill. Make it the first maneuver of the Galactic Patrol." "I'd like to, Virg, but we can't. My boys are ready, but you aren't. No top appointments and no authority." "That can be arranged in a very few minutes. We have been waiting for the psychological moment. This, especially if trouble should develop, is the time. You yourself expect an attack, do you not?" "Yes. I would not start anything unless and until I was ready to finish it, and I see no reason for assuming that whoever it was that tried to kill you is not at least as good a planner as I am." "And the rest of you, Dr. Bergenholm?" "My reasoning, while it does not exactly parallel that of Commissioner Kinnison, leads to the same conclusion, that an attack in great force is to be expected." "Not exactly parallel?" Kinnison demanded. "In what respects?" "You do not seem to have considered the possibility, Commissioner, that the proposed assassination of First Lensman Samms could very well have been only the first step in a comprehensive operation." "I didn't, and it could have been. So go ahead, Virg, with—" The thought was never finished, for Samms had already gone ahead. Simultaneously, it seemed, the minds of 8 other lensmen joined the group of Tellurians. Samms, intensely serious, spoke aloud to his friend. "The Galactic Council is now assembled. Do you, Roderick K. Kinnison, promise to uphold, inasmuch as you consciously can and with all that in you lies, the authority of this Council throughout all space?" "I promise." "By virtue of the authority vested in me, its President, by the Galactic Council, I appoint you Port Admiral of the Galactic Patrol. My fellow councilors are now inducting the armed forces of their various solar systems into the Galactic Patrol. It will not take long. There you may make your appointments and issue orders for the mobilization." The 2 super dreadnoughts were now approaching the hill. The Boise stayed up on top, the Chicago went down. Kinnison, however, paid very little attention to the landing or to Sam's disembarkation, and none whatever to the Chicago's reascent into the high heavens. He knew that everything was under control, and now, alone in his cabin, he was busy. "All personnel of all armed forces just inducted into the Galactic Patrol. Attention!" He spoke into an ultra-wave microphone, the familiar parade ground rasp very evident in his deep and resonant voice. "Kinnison of Tellus, Port Admiral speaking. Each of you has taken oath to the Galactic Patrol?" They had. "At ease. The organization chart already in your hands is made effective as of now. Enter in your logs the date and time. Promotions: Commodore Clayton of North America, Tellus." In his office at New York Spaceport, Clayton came to attention and saluted crisply, his eyes shining, his deeply scarred face alight. "To be Admiral of the First Galactic Region. Commodore Schweikert of Europe, Tellus." In Berlin, a narrow-waisted, almost foppish-seeming man, with roached blond hair and blue eyes, bowed stiffly from the waist and saluted punctiliously. "To be Lieutenant Admiral of the First Galactic Region." And so on down the list. A marshal and a lieutenant marshal of the Solarian system, a general and a lieutenant general of the planet Sol III. Promotions agreed upon long since to fill the high offices thus vacated. Then the list of commodores upon other planets. Gwynlos of Redland, Mars. Sessifson of Talaron, Venus. Raymond of the Jovian subsystem. Newman of Alphacent. Walters of Sirius. Van Meter of Valeria. Adams of Procyon. Roberts of Altair. Bartell of Fomalhaut. Armand of Vega, and Coin of Aldebaran, each of whom was actually the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of a world. Each of these was made general of his planet. "Except for Lieutenant Commodores and up, who will tune their minds to me, dismissed." Kinnison stopped talking and went on to his lens. "That was for the record. I don't need to tell you fellows how glad I am to be able to do this. You're tops, all of you. I don't know of anybody I'd rather have at my back when the ether gets rough." "Right back at you, Chief." "Same to you, Rod." "Rocky Rod, Port Admiral." "Now we're blasting," came a melange of thoughts. Those splendid men with whom he had shared so much of danger and of stress were all as jubilant as schoolboys. But the thing that makes this possible may also make it necessary for us to go to work, to earn your extra stars and my wheel. Kinnison smothered the welter of thoughts and outlined the situation, concluding, "So, you see, it may turn out to be only a drill, but, on the other hand, since the outfit is big enough to have built a war fleet alone if it wanted one, and since it may have had a lot of first-class help that none of us knows anything about, we may be in for the damnedest battle that any of us ever saw. So come prepared for anything. I am now going back onto voice for the record. Kinnison to the commanding officers of all fleets, subfleets, and task forces of the Galactic Patrol. Information. Subject, tactical problem. Defense of the Hill against a postulated black fleet of unknown size, strength, and composition, of unknown nationality or origin, coming from an unknown direction in space at an unknown time. Kinnison to Admiral Clayton. Orders. Take over. I am relinquishing command of the Boise and the Chicago. Clayton to Port Admiral Kinnison. Orders received. Taking over. I am at the Chicago's main starboard lock. I have instructed Ensign Masterson, the commanding officer of this gig, to wait, that he is to take you down to the hill. What? Of all the damned... This was a thought, and unrecorded. Sorry, Rod. I'm sorry as hell, and I'd like no end to have you along. This, too, was a thought. But that's the way it is. Ordinary admirals ride the ether with their fleets. Port admirals stay aground. I report to you, and you run things, in broad, by remote control. I see. Kinnison then lensed a fuming thought at Samms. Alex couldn't do this to me, and wouldn't, and knows damn well that I'd burn him to a crisp if he had the guts to try it. So it's your doing. What in the hell's the big idea? Who's being heroic now, Rod? Samms asked quietly. Use your brain, and then come down here where you belong. And Kinnison, after a long moment of rebellious thought, and with as much grace as he could muster, came down. Down not only to the patrol's familiar offices, but down into the deepest crypts beneath them. He was glum enough and bitter at first, but he found much to do. Grand Fleet Headquarters, his headquarters, was being organized, and the best efforts of the best minds and of the best technologies of three worlds were being devoted to the task of strengthening the already extremely strong defenses of the Hill. And in a very short time the plates of the GFHQ showed that Admiral Clayton and Lieutenant Admiral Schweikert were doing a very nice job. All of the really heavy stuff was of Earth, the mother planet, and was already in place, as were the less numerous and much lighter contingents of Mars, of Venus, and of Jove. And the fleets of the outlying solar systems, cutters, scouts, and a few light cruisers, were neither maintaining fleet formation nor laying course for Sol. Instead, each individual vessel was blasting at maximum for the position in space in which it would form one unit of a formation, englobing at a distance of light-years the entire Solarian system, and each of those hurtling hundreds of ships was literally combing all circumambient space with its furiously driven detector beams. Nice. Kinnison turned to Samms, now beside him at the master plate. Couldn't have done any better myself. After you get it made, what are you going to do with it in case nothing happens? Samms was still somewhat skeptical. How long can you make a drill last? Until all the ensigns have long gray whiskers if I have to. But don't worry. If we have time to get the preliminary globe made, I'll be the surprisedest man in the system." And Kinnison was not surprised. Before full englobement was accomplished, a loudspeaker gave tongue. "Flagship Chicago to Grand Fleet Headquarters," it blatted sharply. "The Black Fleet has been detected. RA 12 hours. Declination plus 20 degrees. Distance about 30 light-years." Kinnison started to say something, then by main force shut himself up. He wanted intensely to take over, to tell the boys out there exactly what to do, but he couldn't. He was now a big shot, damn the luck. He could be, and must be, responsible for broad policy and for general strategy, but once those vitally important decisions had been made, the actual work would have to be done by others. He didn't like it, but there it was. Those flashing thoughts took only an instant of time. "Which is such extreme range that no estimate of strength or composition can be made at present. We will keep you informed." "Acknowledge," he ordered Randolph, who, wearing now the 5 silver bars of Major, was his chief communications officer. "No instructions." He turned to his plate. Clayton hadn't had to be told to pull in his light stuff. It was all pelting hell for leather for Saul and Tellus. 3 general plans of battle had been mapped out by staff. Each had its advantages and its disadvantages. Operation Acorn, long distance, would be fought at, say, 12 light-years. It would keep everything, particularly the big stuff, away from the hill, and would make automatics useless. Unless some got past, or unless the automatics were coming in on a sneak course, or unless several other things, in any one of which cases what a god-awful shellacking the hill would take. He grinned wryly at Samms, who had been following his thought, and quoted, "A vast hemisphere of lambent violet flame through which neither material substance nor destructive ray can pass." Well, that dedicatory statement, while perhaps a bit florid, was strictly true at the time, before the days of allotropic iron and of polycyclic drills. Now I'll quote one. "Nothing is permanent except change." "Uh-huh," and Kinnison returned to his thinking. "Operation ADAC, middle distance." He didn't like it any better now than he had before, even though some of the big brains of staff thought it the ideal solution. A compromise. All of the disadvantages of both of the others, and none of the advantages of either. It still stunk, and unless the Black Fleet had an utterly fantastic composition, Operation ADAC was out. And Virgil Samms, quietly smoking a cigarette, smiled inwardly. Rod the Rock could scarcely be expected to be in favor of any sort of compromise. That left Operation AFIC. Close up. It had 3 tremendous advantages. First, the Hill's own offensive weapons, as long as they lasted. Second, the new Rodebush-Bergenholm fields. Third, no sneak attack could be made without detection and interception. It had one tremendous disadvantage. Some stuff, and probably a lot of it, would get through. Automatics, robots, guided missiles equipped with super-speed drives, with polycyclic drills, and with atomic warheads strong enough to shake the whole world. But with those new fields, shaking the world wouldn't be enough. In order to get deep enough to reach Virgil Samms, they would damn near have to destroy the world. Could anybody build a bomb that powerful? He didn't think so. Earth technology was supreme throughout all known space. Of Earth technologists, the North Americans were, and always had been, tops. Grant that the Black Fleet was basically North American. Grant further that they had a man as good as Adlington, or that they could spy-ray Adlington's brain and laboratories and shops, a tall order. Adlington himself was several months away from a world wrecker, unless he could put one 100 miles down before detonation, which simply was not feasible. He turned to Samms. "It'll be AFIC, Verge. unless they've got a composition that is radically different from anything I ever saw put into space. So, I can't say that I am very much surprised." The calm statement and the equally calm reply were beautifully characteristic of the two men. Kinnison had not asked, nor had Samms offered, advice. Kinnison, after weighing the facts, made his decision. Samms, calmly certain that the decision was the best that could be made upon the data available, accepted it without question or criticism. "We've still got a minute or two," Kinnison remarked. "Don't quite know what to make of their line of approach. Coma Berenices. I don't know of anything at all out that way, do you? They could have detoured, though." "No, I don't." Samms frowned in thought. "Probably a detour." "Check." Kinnison turned to Randolph. "Tell them to report whatever they know. We can't wait any—" As he was speaking, the report came in. The Black Fleet was of more or less normal makeup, considerably larger than the North American contingent, but decidedly inferior to the Patrol's present Grand Fleet. Either 3 or 4 capital ships. "And we've got 6, Kinnison said exultantly. "Our own 2, Asia's Himalaya, Africa's Johannesburg, South America's Bolivar, and Europe's Europa." Battlecruisers and heavy cruisers about in the usual proportions, but an unusually high ratio of scouts and light cruisers. There were either 2 or 3 large ships which could not be classified definitely at that distance. Long-range observers were going out to study them. "Tell Clayton," Kinnison instructed Randolph, "that it is to be Operation Afik, and for him to fly at it." "Report continued." The speaker came to life again. "There are 3 capital ships, apparently of approximately the Chicago class, but teardrop-shaped instead of spherical." "Ouch!" Kinnison flashed a thought at Samms. "I don't like that. They can both fight and run." "The battle cruisers are also teardrops. The small vessels are torpedo-shaped. There are 3 of the large ships, which we are still not able to classify definitely. They are spherical in shape and very large, but do not seem to be either armed or screened, and are apparently carriers, possibly of automatics. We are now making contact. Off." Instead of looking at the plates before them, the 2 lensmen went en rapport with Clayton, so that they could see everything he saw. The stupendous cone of battle had long since been formed. The word to fire was given in a measured 2-second call. Every firing officer in every patrol ship touched his stud in the same split second. And from the gargantuan mouth of the cone there spewed a miles-thick column of energy so raw, so stark, so incomprehensibly violent, that it must have been seen to be even dimly appreciated. It simply cannot be described. Its prototype, Triplanetary's Cylinder of Annihilation, had been a highly effective weapon indeed. The offensive beams of the fish-shaped Nevian cruisers of the Void were even more powerful. The Cleveland Roadbush projectors, developed aboard the original Boise on the long Nevian Way, were stronger still. The composite beam projected by this fleet of the Galactic Patrol, however, was the sublimation and quintessence of each of these, redesigned and redesigned by scientists and engineers of ever-increasing knowledge, rebuilt and rebuilt by technologists of ever-increasing skill. Capital ships and a few of the heaviest cruisers could mount screen generators able to carry that frightful load, but every smaller ship caught in that semi-solid rod of indescribably incandescent fury simply flared into nothingness. But in the instant before the firing order was given, as though precisely timed, which in all probability was the case, the ever-watchful observers picked up 2 items of fact which made the new admiral of the First Galactic Region cut his almost irresistible weapon and break up his cone of battle after only a few seconds of action. 1. Those 3 enigmatic cargo scows had fallen apart before the beam reached them. And hundreds, yes, thousands, of small objects had hurtled radially outward, out well beyond the field of action of the patrol's beam, at a speed many times that of light. 2. Kinnison's forebodings had been prophetic. A swarm of blacks, all small, must have been hidden right on Earth somewhere, were already darting at the hill from the south. "Cease firing," Clayton rapped into his microphone. The dreadful beam expired. "Break cone formation. Independent action. Light cruisers and scouts, get those bombs. Heavy cruisers and battle cruisers, engage similar units of the blacks, 2 to 1 if possible. Chicago and Boise, attack black number 1. Bolivar and Himalaya, number 2. Europa and Johannesburg, number 3. Space was full of darting, flashing, madly warring ships. The 3 black super-dreadnoughts leapt forward as one. Their massed batteries of beams, precisely synchronized and aimed, lashed out as one at the nearest patrol super-heavy, the Boise. Under the vicious power of that beautifully timed thrust, that warship's first, second, and third screens, her very wall shield, flared through the spectrum and into the black. Her chief pilot, however, was fast, very fast, and he had a fraction of a second in which to work. Thus, practically in the instant of her wall shield's failure, she went free, and while she was holed badly and put out of action, she was not blown out of space. In fact, it was learned later that she lost only 40 men. The blacks were not as fortunate. The Chicago, now without a partner, joined beams with the Bolivar and the Himalaya against number 2. Then, a short half-second later, with her other 2 sister ships against number 3. And in that very short space of time 2 black super-dreadnoughts ceased utterly to be. But also, in that scant second of time, black number 1 had all but disappeared. Her canny commander, with no stomach at all for odds of 5 to 1 against, had ordered flight at max. She was already 1/60th of a light-year, about 100,000 million miles, away from the Earth, and was devoting her every energy to the accumulation of still more distance. "Bolivar! Himalaya!" Clayton barked savagely. "Get him!" He wanted intensely to join the chase, but he couldn't. He had to stay here. And he didn't have time even to swear. Instead, without a break, the words tripping over each other against his teeth, "Chicago, Johannesburg, Europa, act at will against heaviest craft left. Blast 'em down!" He gritted his teeth. The scouts and light cruisers were doing their damnedest, but they were outnumbered 3 to 1. Christ, what a lot of stuff was getting through! The blacks wouldn't last long, between the hill and the heavies, but maybe long enough at that. The patrol globe was leaking like a sieve. He voiced a couple of bursts of deep-space profanity, and although he was almost afraid to look, sneaked a quick peek to see how much was left of the hill. He looked, and stopped swearing in the middle of a 4-letter Anglo-Saxon word. What he saw simply did not make sense. Those black bombs should have peeled the armor off of that mountain like the skin off of a nectarine and scattered it from the Pacific to the Mississippi. By now there should be a hole a mile deep where the hill had been. But there wasn't. The hill was still there. It might have shrunk a little. Clayton couldn't see very well because of the worse-than-incandescent radiance of the practically continuous, sense-battering, world-shaking atomic detonations. But the hill was still there. And as he stared, chilled and shaken, at that indescribably terrific spectacle, a black cruiser, holed and helpless, fell toward that armored mountain with an acceleration starkly impossible to credit. And when it struck, it did not penetrate and splash and crater as it should have done. Instead, it simply spread out, in a thin layer, over an acre or so of the fortress' steep and apparently still armored surface. "You saw that, Alex? Good. Otherwise, you could scarcely believe it," came Kinnison's silent voice. "Tell all our ships to stay away. There's a force of over 100,000 Gs acting in a direction normal to every point of our surface. The boys are giving it all the decrement they can, somewhere between distance cube and 4th power, but even so, it's pretty fierce stuff. How about the Bolivar and the Himalaya? Not having much luck catching Mr. Black, are they?" "Why, I don't know. I'll check." "No, sir, they aren't. They report that they are losing ground and will soon lose trace." I was afraid so, from that shape. Roadbush was about the only one who saw it coming. Well, we'll have to redesign and rebuild. Port Admiral Kinnison, shortly after directing the foregoing thought, leaned back in his chair and smiled. The battle was practically over. The hill had come through. The Roadbush-Bergenholm fields had held her together through the most god-awful session of saturation atomic bombing that any world had ever seen or that the mind of man had ever conceived. And the counter-forces had kept the interior rock from flowing like water. So far, so good. Her original armor was gone, converted into... what? For hundreds of feet inward from the surface, she was hotter than the reacting slugs of the Hanfords. Delousing her would be a project, not an operation. Millions of cubic yards of material would have to be hauled off into space with tractors and allowed to simmer for a few hundred years. But what of that? Bergenholm had said that the fields would tend to prevent the radioactives from spreading as they otherwise would, and Virgil Samms was still safe. "Virg, my boy, come along." He took the First Lensman by his good arm and lifted him out of his chair. "Old Dr. Kinnison's peerless prescription for you and me is a big, thick, juicy porterhouse steak." Chapter 8. That murderous attack upon Virgil Samms, and its countering by those new super-lawmen, the Lensmen, and by an entire task force of the North American Armed Forces, was news of civilization-wide importance. As such, it filled every channel of Universal Telenews for an hour. Then, in stunning and crescendo succession, came the staccato reports of the creation of the Galactic Patrol, the mobilization, allegedly for maneuvers, of Galactic Patrol's Grand Fleet, and the ultimately desperate and all too nearly successful attack upon the hill. "Just a second, folks. We'll have it very shortly. You'll see something that nobody ever saw before and that nobody will ever see again. We're getting in as close as the law will let us." The eyes of the Telenews ace reporter and the telephoto lens of his cameraman stared down from a scooter at the furiously smoking, sputteringly incandescent surface of Triplanetary's ancient citadel, while upon dozens of worlds, thousands of millions of people packed themselves tighter and tighter around tens of millions of visiplates and loudspeakers in order to see and to hear the tremendous news. "There it is, folks. Look at it. The only really impregnable fortress ever built by man. A good many of our experts had written it off as obsolete long ago, but it seems these lensmen had something up their sleeves besides their arms. Ha ha. And speaking of lensmen, they haven't been throwing their weight around, so most of us haven't noticed them very much. But this reporter wants to go on record right now as saying there must be a lot more to the lens than any of us has thought, because otherwise nobody would have gone to all that trouble and expense, to say nothing of the tremendous loss of life, just to kill the chief lensman, which seems to have been what they were after. We told you a few minutes ago, you know, that every continent of civilization sent official messages denying most emphatically any connection with this outrage. It's still a mystery, folks. In fact, it is getting more and more mysterious all the time. Not one single man of the Black Fleet was taken alive. Not even in the ships that were only holed. They blew themselves up. And there were no uniforms or books or anything of the kind to be found in any of the wrecks. No identification whatever. And now for the scoop of all time. Universal Telenews has obtained permission to interview the top two lensmen, both of whom you all know, Virgil Samms and Rod the Rock Kinnison, personally for this beam. We are now going down, by remote control of course, right into the Galactic Patrol office, right in the hill itself. Here we are. Now, if you will step just a little closer to the mic, please, Mr. Samms, or should I say... You should say First Lensman Samms, Kinnison said brusquely. Oh yes, First Lensman Samms. Thank you, Mr. Kinnison. Now, First Lensman Samms, our clients all want to know all about the lens. We all know what it does, but what really is it? Who invented it? How does it work? Kinnison started to say something, but Sam silenced him with a thought. "I will answer those questions by asking you one." Sam smiled disarmingly. "Do you remember what happened because the pirates learned to duplicate the golden meteor of the Triplanetary service?" "Oh, I see." The Telenews ace, although brash and not at all thin-skinned, was quick on the uptake. "Hush, hush. T.S.?" "Top secret. Very much so," Samms confirmed. "And we are going to keep some things about the lens secret as long as we possibly can." "Fair enough. Sorry, folks, but you will agree that they're right on that." "Well then, Mr. Samms, who do you think it was that tried to kill you? And where do you think the Black Fleet came from?" "I have no idea," Sam said, slowly and thoughtfully. No idea whatever." "What? Are you sure of that? Aren't you holding back maybe just a little bit of suspicion for diplomatic reasons?" "I am holding nothing back, and through my lens I can make you certain of the fact. Lensed thoughts come from the mind itself, direct, not through such voluntary muscles as the tongue. The mind does not lie, even such lies as you call diplomacy." The lensman demonstrated, and the reporter went on. "He is sure, folks, which fact knocked me speechless for a second or two, which is quite a feat in itself. Now, Mr. Samms, one last question. What is all this lens stuff really about? What are all you lensmen, the Galactic Council and so on, really up to? What do you expect to get out of it? And why would anybody want to make such an all-out effort to get rid of you? And give it to me on the lens, please, if you can do it, and talk at the same time. That was a wonderful sensation, folks, of getting the dope straight and knowing that it was straight." "I can and will answer both by voice and by lens. Our basic purpose is—" and he quoted verbatim the resounding sentences which Mentor had impressed so ineradicably upon his mind. "You know how little happiness, how little real well-being there is upon any world today. We propose to increase both. What we expect to get out of it is happiness and well-being for ourselves, the satisfaction felt by any good workman doing the job for which he is best fitted and in which he takes pride. As to why anyone would want to kill me, the logical explanation would seem to be that some group or organization or race, opposed to that for which we lensmen stand, decided to do away with us and started with me." "Thank you, Mr. Samms. I am sure that we all enjoyed this interview very much. Now, folks, you all know Rocky Rod the Rock Kinnison. Just a little closer, please. Thank you. I don't suppose you have any suspicions either, any more than—" "I certainly have," Kinnison barked, so savagely that 500 million people jumped as one. "How do you want it? Voice, lens, or both?" Then on the lens, "Think it over, son, because I suspect everybody." Both, please, Mr. Kinnison." Even Universal Star reporter was shaken by the quiet but deadly fury of the big lensman's thought, but he rallied so quickly that his hesitation was barely noticeable. "Your lens thought to me was that you suspect everybody, Mr. Kinnison." "Just that. Everybody. I suspect every continental government of every world we know, including that of North America of Tellus. I suspect political parties and organized minorities. I suspect pressure groups. I suspect capital, and I suspect labor. I suspect an organization of criminals. I suspect nations and races and worlds that no one of us has yet heard of, not even you, the top-drawer newshawk of the universe." "But you have nothing concrete to go on, I take it?" "If I did, do you think I'd be standing here talking to you?" First Lensman Samms sat in his private quarters and thought. Lensman Dronvire of Rigel 4 stood behind him and helped him think. Port Admiral Kinnison, with all his force and drive, began a comprehensive program of investigation, consolidation, expansion, redesigning, and rebuilding. Virgilia Samms went to a party practically every night. She danced, she flirted, she talked. how she talked. Meaningless small talk for the most part, but interspersed with artless questions and comments, which, while they perhaps did not put her partner of the moment completely at ease, nevertheless did not quite excite suspicion. Conway Costigan, lens under sleeve, undisguised but inconspicuous, rode the ether lanes, observing minutely and reporting fully. Jack Kinnison piloted and navigated and computed for his friend and boatmate, Mason Northrop, who, completely surrounded by breadboard hookups of new and ever more fantastic complexity, listened and looked, listened and tuned, listened and rebuilt, listened and, finally, took bearings and bearings and bearings with his ultra-sensitive loops. Dull Knowlton and Canobos, with dozens of able helpers, combed the records of 3 worlds in a search which produced as a byproduct a monumental who's who of crime. Skilled technicians fed millions of cards, stack by stack, into the most versatile and most accomplished machines known to the statisticians of the age. And Dr. Nels Bergenholm, abandoning temporarily his regular line of work, devoted his peculiar talents to a highly abstruse research in the closely allied field of organic chemistry. The walls of Virgil Samms' quarters became covered with charts, diagrams, and figures. Tabulations and condensations piled up on his desk and overflowed into baskets upon the floor, until— "Lensman Olmsted of Alphacent, sir," his secretary announced. "Good. Send him in, please." The stranger entered. The 2 men, after staring intently at each other for half a minute, smiled and shook hands vigorously. Except for the fact that the newcomer's hair was brown, they were practically identical. "I'm certainly glad to see you, George. Bergenholm passed you, of course?" "Yes. He says that he can match your hair to mine, even the individual white ones. And he has made me a wig-maker's dream of a wig." "Married?" Sam's mind leapt ahead to possible complications. "Widower, same as you. And, just a minute, going over this once will be enough." He lensed call after call. Lensmen in various parts of space became en rapport with him and thus with each other. "Lensman, especially you, Rod, George Olmsted is here, and his brother Ray is available. I am going to work." "I still don't like it," Kinnison protested. "It's too dangerous. I told the universe I was going to keep you covered, and I meant it." "That's what makes it perfectly safe. That is, if Bergenholm is sure that the duplication is close enough." "I am sure." Bergenholm's deep, resonant pseudo-voice left no doubt at all in any one of the linked minds. "The substitution will not be detected." "And that nobody knows, George, or even suspects that you got your lens." "I am sure of that," Olmsted laughed quietly. "Also, nobody except us and your secretary knows that I am here. For a good many years I have made a specialty of that sort of thing. Photos, fingerprints, and so on have all been taken care of." "Good. I simply cannot work efficiently here." Sam's expressed what all knew to be the simple truth. "Dronveyer's a much better analyst synthesist than I am. As soon as any significant correlation is possible, he will know it. We have learned that the Town Morgan crowd, Mackenzie Power, Osman Industries, and Interstellar Spaceways are all tied in together, and that thionite is involved. But we have not been able to get any further. There is a slight correlation, barely significant, between deaths from thionite and the arrival in the Solarian system of certain Spaceways liners. The fact that certain officials of the Earth Screen Service have been and are spending considerably more than they earn sets up a slight but definite probability that they are allowing spaceships or boats from spaceships to land illegally. These smugglers carry contraband, which may or may not be thionite. In short, we lack fundamental data in every department, and it is high time for me to begin doing my share in getting it." "I don't check you, Virg." None of the Kinnisons ever did give up without a struggle. "Olmsted is a mighty smooth worker, and you are our prime coordinator. Why not let him keep up the counter-espionage, do the job you are figuring on doing yourself, and you stay here and boss it." "I have thought of that a great deal, and have—" "Because Olmsted cannot do it." A hitherto silent mind cut in decisively. "I, Rularion of North Polar Jupiter, say so. There are psychological factors involved. The ability to separate and to evaluate the constituent elements of a complex situation, the ability to make correct decisions without hesitation, as well as many others not as susceptible to concise statement, but which collectively could be called power of mind. How say you, Bergenholm of Tellus? For I have perceived in you a mind approximating in some respects the philosophical and psychological depth of my own." This outrageously egotistical declaration was to the Jovian a simple statement of an equally simple truth, and Bergenholm accepted it as such. "I agree. Olmsted probably could not succeed." "Well then, can Samms?" Kinnison demanded. "Who knows?" came Bergenholm's mental shrug, and simultaneously, "Nobody knows whether I can or not, but I am going to try." And Samms ended, almost, the argument by asking Bergenholm and a couple of other lensmen to come into his office and by taking off his lens. "And that's another thing I don't like." Kinnison offered one last objection. "Without your lens, anything can happen to you." "Oh, I won't have to be without it very long. And besides, Virgilia isn't the only one in the Samms family who can work better, sometimes, without a lens." The lensman came in, and in a surprisingly short time went out. A few minutes later, two lensmen strolled out of Sam's inner office into the outer one. "Goodbye, George," the red-headed man said aloud, "and good luck." "Same to you, Chief." And the brown-haired one strode out. Norma, the secretary, was a smart girl and observant. In her position she had to be. Her eyes followed the man out, then scanned the lensman from toe to crown. "I've never seen anything like it, Mr. Samms," she remarked then. "Except for the difference in coloring and a sort of, well, stoopiness, he could be your identical twin. You two must have a common ancestor, or several, not too far back, didn't you?" "We certainly did. Quadruple second cousins, you might call it. We have known of each other for years, but this is the first time we have met." "Quadruple second cousins? What does that mean? How come?" "Well, say that once upon a time there were two men named Albert and Chester." "What? Not two Irishmen named Pat and Mike?" "You're slipping, boss." The girl smiled roguishly. During rush hours she was always the fast, cool, efficient secretary. But in moments of ease, such persiflage as this was the usual thing in the First Lensman's private office. "Not at all up to your usual form." "Merely because I am speaking now as a genealogist, not as a raconteur. But to continue, we will say that Chester and Albert had 4 children apiece, 2 boys and 2 girls, 2 pairs of identical twins each. And when they grew up, halfway up, that is— Don't tell me that we are going to suppose that all those identical twins married each other." "Exactly. Why not?" "Well, it would be stretching the laws of probability all out of shape. But go ahead. I can see what's coming, I think." Each of those couples had one and only one child. We will call those children Jim Samms and Sally Olmsted. John Olmsted and Irene Samms. The girl's levity disappeared. "James Alexander Samms and Sarah Olmsted Samms. Your parents. I didn't see what was coming after all. This George Olmsted, then, is your—" "Whatever it is, yes. I can't name it either. Maybe you had better call genealogy some day and find out. But it's no wonder we look alike. And there are 3 of us, not 2. George has an identical twin brother." The red-haired lensman stepped back into the inner office, shut the door, and lensed a thought at Virgil Samms. "It worked, Virgil. I talked to her for 5 solid minutes, practically leaning on her desk, and she didn't tumble. And if this wig of Bergenholm's fooled her so completely, The job he did on you would fool anybody." "Fine. I've done a little testing myself on the keenest men I know, without a trace of recognition so far." His last lingering doubt resolved, Samms boarded the ponderous, radiation-proof, neutron-proof shuttle scow which was the only possible means of entering or leaving the hill. A fast cruiser whisked him to Nampa, where Olmsted's accidentally damaged transcontinental transport was being repaired, and from which city Olmsted had been gone so briefly that no one had missed him. He occupied Olmsted's space. He surrendered the remainder of Olmsted's ticket. He reached New York. He took a copter to Senator Morgan's office. He was escorted into the private office of Herkimer III. "Olmsted, of Alphacent." "Yes?" Herkimer's hand moved ever so little upon his desk top. "Here." The lensman dropped an envelope upon the desk in such fashion that it came to rest within an inch of the hand. "Prints here." Samms made prints. "Wash your hands over there." Herkimer pressed a button. "Check all these prints against each other and the files. Check the two halves of the torn sheet, fiber to fiber." He turned to the lensless lensman, now standing quietly before his desk. "Routine. A formality in your case, but necessary." "Of course." Then, for long seconds, the two hard men stared into the hard depths of each other's eyes. "You may do, Olmsted. We have had very good reports of you. But you have never been in Thionite?" "No, I have never even seen any." "What do you want to get into it for?" "Your scouts sounded me out. What did they tell you?" "The usual thing. Promotion from the ranks into the brass, to get to where I can do myself and the organization some good." "Yourself first, the organization second?" "What else? Why should I be different from the rest of you?" This time the locked eyes held longer, one pair smoldering, the other gold-flecked, tawny ice. "Why, indeed?" Herkimer smiled thinly. "We do not advertise it, however." "Outside I wouldn't either. But here I'm laying my cards flat on the table." "I see. You will do, Olmsted, if you live. There's a test, you know." "They told me there would be." "Well, aren't you curious to know what it is?" "Not particularly. You passed it, didn't you?" "What do you mean by that crack?" Herkimer leapt to his feet, his eyes, smoldering before, now ablaze. "Exactly what I said, no more and no less. You may read into it anything you please." Sam's voice was as cold as were his eyes. "You picked me out because of what I am. Did you think that moving upstairs would make a bootlicker out of me?" "Not at all." Herkimer sat down and took from a drawer two small, transparent, vaguely capsule-like tubes, each containing a few particles of purple dust. "You know what this is?" "I can guess." "Each of these is a good heavy jolt, about all that a strong man with a strong heart can stand. Sit down. Here is one dose. Pull the cover, stick the capsule up one nostril, squeeze the ejector, and sniff. If you can leave this other dose sitting here on the desk, you will live, and thus pass the test. If you can't, you die." Sam sat and pulled and squeezed and sniffed. His forearms hit the desk with a thud. His hands clenched themselves into fists, the tight stretched tendons standing boldly out. His face turned white. His eyes jammed themselves shut. His jaw muscles sprang into bands and lumps as they clamped his teeth hard together. Every voluntary muscle in his body went into a rigor as extreme as that of death itself. His heart pounded. His breathing became stertorous. This was the dreadful muscle lock so uniquely characteristic of Thionite, the frenzied immobility of the ultimately passionate satisfaction of every desire. The Galactic Patrol became for him an actuality, a force for good pervading all the worlds of all the galaxies of all the universes of all existing space-time continual. He knew what the lens was and why. He understood time and space. He knew the absolute beginning and the ultimate end. He also saw things and did things over which it is best to draw a kindly veil, for every desire, mental or physical, open or sternly suppressed, noble or base, that Virgil Samms had ever had was being completely satisfied. Every desire. As Sam sat there, straining motionlessly upon the verge of death through sheer ecstasy, a door opened and Senator Morgan entered the room. Herkimer started, almost imperceptibly, as he turned. Had there been, or not, an instantaneously suppressed flash of guilt in those now completely clear and frank brown eyes? "Hi, Chief. Come in and sit down. Glad to see you. This is not exactly my idea of fun." "No? When did you stop being a sadist?" The senator sat down beside his minion's desk. The fingertips of his left hand began soundlessly to drum. "You wouldn't have, by any chance, been considering the idea of—" He paused significantly. What an idea! Herkimer's act, if it was an act, was flawless. "He's too good a man to waste." "I know it, but you didn't act as though you did. I've never seen you come out such a poor second in an interview. And it wasn't because you didn't know to start with just what kind of a tiger he was. That's why he was selected for this job. And it would have been so easy to give him just a wee bit more." "That's preposterous, Chief, and you know it." "Do I? However, it couldn't have been jealousy, because he isn't being considered for your job. He won't be over you, and there's plenty of room for everybody. What was the matter? Your bloodthirstiness wouldn't have taken you that far under the circumstances. Come clean, Herkimer." "Okay. I hate the whole damned family," Herkimer burst out viciously. "I see. That adds up." Morgan's face cleared. His fingers became motionless. "You can't make the Samms wench and aren't in position to skin her alive, so you get allergic to all her relatives. That adds up. But let me tell you something." His quiet, level voice carried more of a menace than most men's loudest threats. "Keep your love life out of business and keep that sadistic streak under control. Don't let anything like this happen again." "I won't, Chief. I got off the beam. But he made me so damn mad." "Certainly. That's exactly what he was trying to do. Elementary. If he could make you look small, it would make him look big, and he just about did. But watch now, he's coming to." Sam's muscles relaxed. He opened his eyes groggily. Then, as a wave of humiliated realization swept over his consciousness, he closed them again and shuddered. He had always thought himself pretty much of a man. How could he possibly have descended to such nauseous depths of depravity, of turpitude, of sheer moral degradation? And yet every cell of his being was shrieking its demand for more. His mind and his substance alike were permeated by an overmastering craving to experience again the ultimate thrills which they had so tremendously, so outrageously enjoyed. There was another good jolt lying right there on the desk in front of him, even though thionite sniffers always saw to it that no more of the drug could be obtained without considerable physical exertion, which exertion would bring them to their senses. If he took that jolt, it would kill him. What of it? What was death? What good was life except to enjoy such thrills as he had just had and was about to have again? And besides, thionite couldn't kill him. He was a Superman. He had just proved it. He straightened up and reached for the capsule, and that effort, small as it was enough to bring First Lensman Virgil Samms back under control. The craving, however, did not decrease. Rather, it increased. Months were to pass before he could think of thionite, or even of the color purple, without a spasmodic catching of the breath and a tightening of every muscle. Years were to pass before he could forget, even partially, the theretofore unsuspected dwellers in the dark recesses of his own mind. Nevertheless, from the store of whatever it was that made him what he was, Virgil Samms drew strength. Thumb and forefinger touched the capsule, but instead of picking it up, he pushed it across the desk toward Herkimer. "Put it away, bub. One whiff of that stuff will last me for life." He stared unfathomably at the secretary, then turned to Morgan and nodded. After all, he did not say that he ever passed this or any other test. He just didn't contradict me when I said it. With a visible effort, Herkimer remained silent, but Morgan did not. "You talk too much, Olmsted. Can you stand up yet?" Gripping the desk with both hands, Samms heaved himself to his feet. The room was spinning and gyrating. Every individual thing in it was moving in a different and impossible orbit. His already splintered skull threatened more and more violently to emulate a fragmentation bomb. Black and white spots and varicolored flashes filled his cone of vision. He wrenched one hand free, then the other, and collapsed back into the chair. "Not yet. Quite," he admitted through stiff lips. Although he was careful not to show it, Morgan was amazed, not that the man had collapsed, but that he had been able to so soon lift himself even an inch. Tiger was not the word. This Olmsted must be 7/8 dinosaur. "It takes a few minutes, longer for some, not so long for others," Morgan said blandly. "But what makes you think Herkimer here never took one of the same?" "Huh?" Again, two pairs of eyes locked and held, and this time the duel was longer and more pregnant. "What do you think? How do you suppose I lived to get as old as I am now? By being dumb?" Morgan unwrapped a Venerian cigar, settled it comfortably between his teeth, lit it, and drew 3 slow puffs before replying. "Ah, a student. An analytical mind," he said evenly and apparently irrelevantly. "Let's skip Herkimer for the moment. Try your hand on me." "Why not? From what we hear out in the field, you have always been in the upper brackets, so you probably never had to prove that you could take it or leave it alone. My guess would be, though, that you could." "The good old oil, eh?" Morgan allowed his face and voice to register a modicum, precisely metered, of contempt. "How to get along in the world. Lesson 1. Butter up the boss." "Nice try, Senator, but I'll have to score you a clean miss." Samms, now back to almost normal, grinned companionably. "We both know that if I were still in the kindergarten, I wouldn't be here now." "I'll let that one pass, this time." Under that look and tone, Morgan's underlings were wont to cringe, but this Olmsted was not the cringing type. "Don't do it again. It might not be safe." "Oh, it would be safe enough, for today at least. There are 2 factors which you are very carefully ignoring. First, I haven't accepted the job yet." "Are you innocent enough to think you'll get out of this building alive if I don't accept you?" "If you want to call it innocence, yes. Oh, I know you've got gunnies all over the place, but they don't mean a thing." "No?" Morgan's voice was silkily venomous. "No." Olmsted was completely unimpressed. "Put yourself in my place. You know I've been around a long time, and not just around my mother. I was weaned quite a number of years ago." "I see. You don't scare worth a damn. A point. And you are testing me, just as I am testing you. Another point. I'm beginning to like you, George. I think I know what your second point is, but let's have it, just for the record." "I'm sure you do. Any man to be my boss has got to be at least as good a man as I am. Otherwise, I'd take his job away from him." "Fair enough. By God, I do like you, Olmsted." Morgan, his big face wreathed in smiles, got up, strode over, and shook hands vigorously, and Samms, scan as he would, could not even hazard a guess as to how much, if any, of this enthusiasm was real. "Do you want the job? And when can you go to work?" "Yes, sir. 2 hours ago, sir." "That's fine," Morgan boomed. Although he did not comment upon it, he noticed and understood the change in the form of address. "Without knowing what the job is, or how much it pays?" "Neither is important, sir, at the moment." Samms, who had got up easily enough to shake hands, now shook his head experimentally. Nothing rattled. Good. He was in pretty good shape already. "As to the job, I can either do it or find out why it can't be done. As to pay, I've heard you called a lot of things, but piker was never one of them." "Very well. I predict that you will go far." Morgan again shook the lensman's hand, and again Samms could not evaluate the senator's sincerity. "Tuesday afternoon, New York Spaceport. Spaceship Virgin Queen. Report to Captain Willoughby in the dock office at 1400 hours. Stop at the cashier's office on your way out. Goodbye." Chapter 9. Piracy was rife. There was no suspicion, however, nor would there be for many years, that there was anything of very large purpose about the business. Murgatroyd was simply a captain kidd of space, and even if he were actually connected with galactic spaceways, that fact would not be surprising. Such relationships had always existed. The most ferocious and dreaded pirates of the ancient world worked in full partnership with the first families of that world. Virgil Samms was thinking of pirates and of piracy when he left Senator Morgan's office. He was still thinking of them while he was reporting to Roderick Kinnison. Hence, "But that's enough about this stuff and me, Rod. Bring me up to date on Operation Boscone." "Branching out no end. Your guess was right that Spaceway's losses to pirates were probably phony. But it wasn't the known attacks, that is, those cases in which the ship was found later with some or most of the personnel alive, that gave us the real information. They were all pretty much alike. But when we studied the total disappearances, we really hit the jackpot." "That doesn't sound just right, but I'm listening." "You'd better, since it goes farther than even you suspected. It was no trouble at all to get the passenger lists and the names of the crews of the independent ships that were lost without a trace. Their relatives and friends, we concentrated mostly on wives, could be located, except for the usual few who moved around so much that they got lost. Spacemen average young, you know, and their wives are still younger. Well, these young women got jobs, most of them remarried, and so on. In short, normal." "And in the case of Spaceways, not normal?" "Decidedly not. In the first place, you'd be amazed at how little publication was ever done of passenger lists, and apparently crew lists were not published at all. No use going into detail as to how we got this stuff, but we got it. However, 9/10 of the wives had disappeared, and none had remarried. The only ones we could find were those who did not care, even when their husbands were alive, whether they ever saw them again or not. But the big break was, you remember the disappearance of that girls' school cruise ship?" "Of course. It made a lot of noise." "An interesting point in connection with that cruise is that 2 days before the ship blasted off, the school was robbed. The vault was opened with thermite, and the whole administration building burned to the ground. All the school's records were destroyed. Thus, the list of missing had to be made up from statements made by friends, relatives, and whatnot." "I remember something of the kind. My impression was, though, that the spaceship company furnished—" "Oh!" The tone of Sam's thought alerted sharply. "That was Spaceways, undercover?" "Definitely. Our best guess is that there were quite a few shiploads of women disappeared about that time, instead of one. Austine's college had more students that year than ever before or since. It was the extras, not the regulars, who went on that cruise. The ones who figured it would be more convenient to disappear in space than to become ordinary missing persons. But Rod, that would mean... But where? It means just that. And finding out where will run into a project. There are over 2,000 million suns in this galaxy, and the best estimate is that there are more than that many planets habitable by beings more or less human in type. You know how much of the galaxy has been explored, and how fast the work of exploring the rest of it is going. Your guess is just as good as mine as to where those spacemen and engineers and their wives and girlfriends are now. I'm sure, though, of 4 things, none of which we can ever begin to prove. 1, they didn't die in space. 2, they landed on a comfortable and very well-equipped Tellurian planet. 3, they built a fleet there. 4, that fleet attacked the hill. Murgatroyd, do you suppose? Although surprised by Kinnison's tremendous report, Samms was not dismayed. No idea, no data yet. And they'll keep on building, Sam said. They had a fleet much larger than the one they expected to meet. Now they'll build one larger than all our combined forces. And since the politicians will always know what we are doing, or it might be, I wonder. You can stop wondering. Kinnison grinned savagely. What do you mean? Just what you were going to think about. You know the edge of the galaxy closest to Tellus, where that big rift cuts in? Yes. Across that rift, where it won't be surveyed for 1,000 years, there's a planet that could be Earth's twin sister. No atomic energy, no space drive, but heavily industrialized and anxious to welcome us. Project Bennett. Very, very hush-hush. Nobody except Lensman know anything about it. 2 friends of Dronvier's, smart, smooth operators, are in charge. It's going to be the Navy Yard of the Galactic Patrol. But Rod, Samms began to protest, his mind leaping ahead to the numberless problems, the tremendous difficulties inherent in the program which his friend had outlined so briefly. Forget it, Virg, Kinnison cut in. It won't be easy, of course, but we can do anything they can do, and do it better. You can go calmly ahead with your own chores, knowing that when, and notice that I say when, not if, we need it, we'll have a fleet up our sleeves that will make the official one look like a task force. But I see you're at the rendezvous, and there's Jill. Tell her hi for me. And as the Vagians say, tail high, brother. Samms was in the hotel's ornate lobby. A couple of uniformed boys and Jill Samms were approaching. The girl reached him first. You had no trouble in recognizing me then, my dear? None at all, Uncle George. She kissed him perfunctorily. The bellhops faded away. So nice to see you. I've heard so much about you. The marine room, you said? Yes, I reserved a table. And in that famous restaurant, in the unequaled privacy of the city's noisiest and most crowded night spot, they drank sparingly, ate not so sparingly, and talked not sparingly at all. It's perfectly safe here, you think? Jill asked first. Perfectly. A super-sensitive microphone couldn't hear anything, and it's so dark that a lip reader, even if he could read us, would need a pair of 12-inch night glasses. Goody. They did a marvelous job, Dad. If it weren't for your personality, I wouldn't recognize you even now. You think I'm safe, then? Absolutely. Then we'll get down to business. You, Knobos, and Dull Knowlton all have keen and powerful minds. You can't all be wrong. Spaceways, then, is tied in with both the Town Morgan gang and with Thionite. The logical extension of that, Dull certainly thought of it, even though he didn't mention it, would be... Samms paused. Check. That the notorious Murgatroyd, instead of being just another pirate chief, is really working for Spaceways and belongs to the Town Morgan Isaacson gang. But, Dad, what an idea! Can things be that rotten, really? They may be worse than that. Now the next thing, who, in your opinion, is the real boss? Well, it certainly is not Herkimer III. Jill ticked him off on a pink forefinger. She had been asked for an opinion. She set out to give it without apology or hesitation. He could, just about, direct the affairs of a hot-dog stand. Nor is it clander. He isn't even a little fish. He's scarcely a minnow. Equally, certainly it is neither the Venerian nor the Martian. They may run planetary affairs, but nothing bigger. I haven't met Murgatroyd, of course, but I have had several evaluations, and he does not rate up with town. And Big Jim, and this surprised me as much as it will you, is almost certainly not the prime mover. She looked at him questioningly. That would have surprised me tremendously yesterday, but after today, I'll tell you about that presently, it doesn't. I'm glad of that. I expected an argument, and I have been inclined to question the validity of my own results, since they do not agree with common knowledge, or rather what is supposed to be knowledge. That leaves Isaacson and Senator Morgan. Jill frowned in perplexity, seemed for the first time unsure. Isaacson is, of course, a big man, able, well-informed, extremely capable, a top-notch executive. Not only is, would have to be to run Spaceways. On the other hand, I have always thought that Morgan was nothing but a windbag. Jill stopped talking, left the thought hanging in the air. So did I, until today, Samms agreed grimly. I thought he was simply an unusually corrupt, greedy, rabble-rousing politician. Our estimates of him may have to be changed very radically. Sam's mind raced. From two entirely different angles of approach, Jill and he had arrived at the same conclusion. But if Morgan were really the big shot, would he have deigned to interview personally such small fry as Olmsted? Or was Olmsted's job of more importance than he, Samms, had supposed? I've got a dozen more things to check with you, he went on, almost without a pause. But since this leadership matter is the only one in which my experience would affect your judgment, I had better tell you about what happened today. Tuesday came, an hour 1400, and Sam strode into an office. There was a big, clean desk, a wiry, intense, gray-haired man. Captain Willoughby? Yes. George Olmsted reporting. Fourth officer. The captain punched a button. The heavy, soundproof door closed itself and locked. Fourth officer? New rank, eh? What does the ticket cover? New and special. Here's the articles. Read it and sign it. He did not add, or else. It was not necessary. It was clearly evident that Captain Willoughby, ever garrulous, intended to be particularly reticent with his new subordinate. Samms read, Fourth officer, shall, no duties or responsibilities in the operation or maintenance of said spaceship, cargo. Then came a clause which fairly leapt from the paper and smote his eyes. When in command of a detail outside the hull of said spaceship, he shall enforce, by the infliction of death or such other penalty as he deems fit. The lensman was rocked to the heels, but did not show it. Instead, he took the captain's pen. His own, as far as Willoughby was concerned, could have been filled with vanishing ink, and wrote George Olmsted's name in George Olmsted's bold, flowing script. Willoughby then took him aboard the good ship Virgin Queen and led him to his cabin. Here you are, Mr. Olmsted. Beyond getting acquainted with the supercargo and the rest of your men, you will have no duties for a few days. You have full run of the ship, with one exception. Stay out of the control room until I call you. Is that clear? Yes, sir. Willoughby turned away, and Samms, after tossing his space bag into the rack, took inventory. The room was, of course, very small, but, considering the importance of mass, it was almost extravagantly supplied. There were shelves, or rather tight racks of books. There were sun lamps and card shelves and exercisers and games. There was a receiver capable of bringing in programs from almost anywhere in space. The room had only one lack. It did not have an ultrawave visiplate. Nor was this lack surprising. They would scarcely let George Olmsted know where they were taking him. Samms was surprised, however, when he met the men who were to be directly under his command, for instead of 1, or at most 2, they numbered exactly 40, and they were all, he thought at first glance, the dregs and sweepings of the lowest dives in space. Before long, however, he learned that they were not all space rats and denizens of Skid Row's. 6 of them, the strongest physically and the hardest mentally of the lot, were fugitives from lethal chambers, murderers and worse. He looked at the biggest, toughest one of the 6, a rock-drill-eyed, red-haired giant, and asked, "What did they tell you, Torn, that your job was going to be?" "They didn't say, just that it was dangerous, but if I'd done exactly what my boss would tell me to do, and nothing else, I might not even get hurt. And I was due to take the deep breath the next week, see? That's just how it was, boss." "I see." And one by one, Virgil Samms, master psychologist, studied and analyzed his motley crew until he was called into the control room. The navigating tank was covered. No charts were to be seen. The one live visiplate showed a planet and a fiercely blue-white sun. "My orders are to tell you, at this point, all I know about what you've got to do and about that planet down there. Trenko, they call it." To Virgil Samms, the first adherent of civilization ever to hear it, that name meant nothing whatever. "You are to take about 5 of your men, go down there, and gather all the green leaves you can. Not green in color, sort of purplish. What they call broadleaf is the best. Leaves about 2 feet long and a foot wide. But don't be too choosy. If there isn't any broadleaf handy, grab anything you can get hold of." "What is the opposition?" Samms asked quietly. "And what have they got that makes them so tough?" "Nothing. No inhabitants even. Just the planet itself. Next to Arisia, it's the goddamnedest planet in space. I've never been any closer to it than this, and I never will, so I don't know anything about it except what I hear. But there's something about it that kills men or drives them crazy. We spend 7 or 8 boats every trip, and 35 or 40 men, and the biggest load that anybody ever took away from here was just under 200 pounds of leaf. A good many times we don't get any." "They go crazy, eh?" In spite of his control, Samms paled. But it couldn't be like Arisia. "What are the symptoms? What do they say?" "Various. Main thing seems to be that they lose their sight. They don't go blind exactly, but can't see where anything is, or if they do see it, it isn't there. And it rains over 40 feet deep every night, and yet it all dries up by morning. The worst electrical storms in the universe, and wind velocities, I could show you charts on that, of over 800 miles an hour. Phew! How about time? With your permission, I would like to do some surveying before I try to land." "A smart idea. A couple of the other boys had the same, but it didn't help. They didn't come back. I'll give you 2 Tellurian days, no, 3, before I give up and start sending out the other boats. Pick out your 5 men and see what you can do." As the boat dropped away, Willoughby's voice came briskly from a speaker. "I know that you 5 men have got ideas. Forget 'em. 4th Officer Olmsted has the authority and the orders to put a half-ounce slug through the guts of any or all of you that don't jump and jump fast to do what he tells you. And if that boat makes any funny moves, I blast it out of the ether. Good harvesting." For 48 Tellurian hours, taking time out only to sleep, Sam scanned and surveyed the planet Trenko, and the more he studied it, the more outrageously abnormal it became. Trenko was and is a peculiar planet indeed. Its atmosphere is not air as we know it. Its hydrosphere does not resemble water. Half of that atmosphere and most of that hydrosphere are one chemical, a substance of very low heat of vaporization and having a boiling point of about 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Trenco's days are intensely hot. Its nights are bitterly cold. At night, therefore, it rains, and by comparison a Tellurian downpour of 1 inch per hour is scarcely a drizzle. Upon Trenco it really rains. 47 feet and 5 inches of precipitation every night of every Trenconian year. And this tremendous condensation, of course, causes wind. Willoughby's graphs were accurate. Except at Trenco's very poles, there is not a spot in which, or a time at which, an earthly gale would not constitute a dead calm. And along the equator, at every sunrise and every sunset, the wind blows from the day side into the night side at a velocity which no Tellurian hurricane or cyclone, however violent, has even distantly approached. Also, therefore, there is lightning. Not in the mild and occasional flashes which we of gentle Terra know, but in a continuous blinding glare which outshines a normal sun. In battering, shattering, multi-billion-volt discharges which not only make darkness unknown there, but also distort beyond recognition and beyond function the warp and the woof of space itself. Sight is almost completely useless in that fantastically altered medium. So is the ultra-beam. Landing on the daylight side, except possibly at exact noon, would be impossible because of the wind, nor could the ship stay landed for more than a couple of minutes. Landing on the night side would be practically as bad, because of the terrific charge the boat would pick up, unless the boat carried something that could be rebuilt into a leaker. Did it? It did. Time after time, from pole to pole and from midnight around the clock, Samms stabbed visibeam and spy ray down toward Trenco's falsely visible surface, with consistently and meaninglessly impossible results. The planet tipped, lurched, spun, and danced. It broke up into chunks, each of which began insanely to follow mathematically impossible paths. Finally, in desperation, he rammed a beam down and held it down. Again he saw the planet break up before his eyes, but this time he held on. He knew that he was well out of the stratosphere, a good 200 miles up. Nevertheless, he saw a tremendous mass of jagged rock falling straight down, with terrific velocity, upon his tiny lifeboat. Unfortunately, the crew, to whom he had not been paying overmuch attention of late, saw it too, and one of them, with a bestial yell, leapt toward Samms and the controls. Samms, reaching for pistol and blackjack, whirled around just in time to see the big redhead lay the would-be attacker out cold with a vicious hand's-edged chop at the base of the skull. "Thanks, Torn." "Why?" "Because I want to get out of this alive, and he'd have had us all in hell in 15 minutes. You know a hell of a lot more than we do, so I'm playing it your way, see?" "I see. Can you use a sap?" "An artist," the big man admitted modestly. "Just tell me how long you want a guy to be out, and I won't miss it a minute either way. But you better blow that crumb's brains out right now. He ain't no damn good." "Not until after I see whether he can work or not. You're a Procyon, aren't you?" "Yeah, Midlands, North Central." "What did you do?" "Nothing much at first. Just killed a guy that needed killing. But the goddamn louse had a lot of money, so they gave me 25 years. I didn't like it very well, and acted rough, so they gave me solitary. Boot, bandage, and so on. So I tried a break. Killed 6 or 8, maybe a dozen guards, but didn't quite make it. So they slated me for the big whiff. That's all, boss. I'm promoting you now to squad leader. Here's the sap." He handed Torn his blackjack. "Watch him. I'll be too busy to. This landing is going to be tough." "Gotcha, boss." Torn was calibrating his weapon by slugging himself experimentally on the leg. "Go ahead. As far as these crumbs are concerned, you've got this air tank all to yourself." Samms had finally decided what he was going to do. He located the Terminator on the morning side, poised his little ship somewhat nearer to dawn than to midnight, and cut the rope. He took one quick reading on the sun, cut off his plates, and let her drop, watching only his pressure gauges and gyros. 100 millimeters of mercury, 300, 500. He slowed her down. He was going to hit a thin liquid, but if he hit it too hard he would smash the boat, and he had no idea what the atmospheric pressure at Trenko's surface would be. 600. Even this late at night it might be greater than Earth's, and it might be a lot less. 700. Slower and slower he crept downward, his tension mounting infinitely faster than did the needle of the gauge. This was an instrument landing with a vengeance. 800. How was the crew taking it? How many of them had Torn had to disable? He glanced quickly around. None. Now that they could not see the hallucinatory images upon the plates, they were not suffering at all. He himself was the only one aboard who was feeling the strain. 900. 940. The boat hit the drink with a crashing, splashing impact. Its pace was slow enough, however, and the liquid was deep enough so that no damage was done. Samms applied a little driving power and swung his craft's sharp nose into line toward the sun. The little ship plowed slowly forward, as nearly just awash as Samms could keep her, grounded as gently as a river steamboat upon a mudflat. The starkly incredible downpour slackened. The lensman knew that the second critical moment was at hand. "Strap down, men, until we see what this wind is going to do to us." The atmosphere, moving at a velocity well above that of sound, was in effect not a gas, but a solid. Even a spaceboat's hard skin of alloy plate, with all its bracing, could not take what was coming next. Inert, she would be split open, smashed, flattened out, and twisted into pretzels. Sam's fingers stabbed down. The berg went into action. The lifeboat went free just as that raging blast of quasi-solid vapor wrenched her into the air. The second descent was much faster and much easier than the first. Nor this time did Samms remain surfaced or drive toward shore. Knowing now that this ocean was not deep enough to harm his vessel, he let her sink to the bottom. More, he turned her on her side and drove her at a flat angle into the bottom, so deep that the rim of her starboard lock was flush with the ocean's floor. Again they waited, and this time the wind did not blow the lifeboat away. Upon purely theoretical grounds, Samms had reasoned that the weird distortion of vision must be a function of distance, and his observations so far had been in accord with that hypothesis. Now, slowly and cautiously, he sent out a visibeam. 10 feet, 20, 40, all clear. At 50, the seeing was definitely bad. At 60, it became impossible. He shortened back to 40 and began to study the vegetation, growing with such fantastic speed that the leaves, pressed flat to the ground by the gale and anchored there by heavy rootlets, were already inches long. There was also what seemed to be animal life of sorts, but Samms was not, at the moment, interested in Tranconian zoology. "Are them the plants we're going to get, boss?" Torn asked, staring into the plate over Sam's shoulder. "Shall we go out now and start picking 'em?" "Not yet. Even if we could open the port, the blast would wreck us. Also, it would shear your head off, flush with the combing, as fast as you stuck it out. This wind should ease off after a while. We'll go out a little before noon. In the meantime, we'll get ready. Have the boys break out a couple of spare number 12 struts, some clamps and chain, 4 snatch blocks, and 100 feet of heavy space line." "Good," he went on when the order had been obeyed. "Rig the line from the winch through the snatch blocks here and here and here, so I can haul you back against the wind. While you are doing that, I'll rig a remote control on the winch." Shortly before Trenko's fierce blue-white sun reached meridian, the 6 men donned spacesuits, and Samms cautiously opened the airlock ports. They worked. The wind was now scarcely more than an earthly hurricane. The wildly whipping broadleaf plants, struggling upward, were almost halfway to the vertical. The leaves were apparently almost fully grown. 4 men clamped their suits to the line. The line was paid out. Each man selected 2 leaves, the largest, fattest, purplest ones he could reach. Samms hauled them back and received the loot. Tworn stowed the leaves away. Again. With noon there came a few minutes of calm. A strong man could stand against the now highly variable wind, could move around without being blown beyond the horizon, and during those few minutes all 6 men gathered leaves. That time, however, was very short. The wind steadied into the reverse direction with ever-increasing fury. Winch and spaceline again came into play, and in a scant half-hour, when the line began to hum an almost musical note under its load, Samms decided to call it quits. "That'll be all for today, boys," he announced. "About twice more, and this line will part. You've done too good a job to lose you. Secure ship." "Shall I blow the air, sir?" Tworn asked. "I don't think so." Samms thought for a moment. "No, I'm afraid to take the chance. This stuff, whatever it is probably as poisonous as cyanide. We'll keep our suits on and exhaust into space." Time passed. Night came, the rain and the flood. The bottom softened. Samms blasted the lifeboat out of the mud and away from the planet. He opened the bleeder valves, then both airlock ports. The contaminated air was replaced by the ultra-hard vacuum of the interplanetary void. He signaled the Virgin Queen. The lifeboat was taken aboard. "Quick trip, Olmsted," Willoughby congratulated him. "I'm surprised that you got back at all, to say nothing of with so much stuff and not losing a man. Give me the weight, mister, fast." 348 pounds, sir," the supercargo reported. "My God, and all pure broadleaf. Nobody ever did that before. How do you do it, Olmsted?" "I don't know whether that would be any of your business or not." Sim's mien was not insulting, merely thoughtful. "Not that I give a damn, but my way might not help anybody else much, and I think I had better report to the main office first and let them do the telling. Fair enough?" "Fair enough," the skipper conceded ungrudgingly. "What a load, and no losses." "1 boatload of air is all, but air is expensive out here." Samms made a point deliberately. "Air," Willoughby snorted. "I'll swap you 100 flasks of air any time for 1 of those leaves." Which was what Samms wanted to know. Captain Willoughby was smart. He knew that the way to succeed was to use and then to trample upon his inferiors, to toady to such superiors as were too strong to be pulled down and thus supplanted. He knew this Olmsted had what it took to be a big shot. Therefore, "They told me to keep you in the dark until we got to Trenco." He more than half apologized to his 4th officer shortly after the Virgin Queen blasted away from the Trenconian system. "But they didn't say anything about afterwards. Maybe they figured you wouldn't be aboard anymore as usual. But anyway, you can stay right here in the control room if you want to." "Thanks, Skipper, but mightn't it be just as well," he jerked his head inconspicuously toward the other officers, "to play the string out this trip? I don't care where we're going, and we don't want anybody to get any funny ideas." "That'd be a lot better, of course, as long as you know that your cards are all aces as far as I'm concerned." "Thanks, Willoughby. I'll remember that." Samms had not been entirely frank with the private captain. From the time required to make the trip, he knew to within a few parsecs Trenco's distance from Sol. He did not know the direction, since the distance was so great that he had not been able to recognize any star or constellation. He did know, however, the course upon which the vessel then was, and he would know courses and distances from then on. He was well content. A couple of uneventful days passed. Samms was again called into the control room to see that the ship was approaching a 3-sun solar system. "This where we're going to land?" he asked indifferently. "We ain't going to land," Willoughby told him. You are going to take a broadleaf down in your boat, close enough so that you can parachute it down to where it has to go. Way enough, pilot, go inert, and match intrinsics. Now, Olmsted, watch. You've seen systems like this before. No, but I know about them. Those two suns over there are a hell of a lot bigger and further away than they look, and this one here, much smaller, is in the Trojan position. Have those big suns got any planets? 5 or 6 apiece, they say, all hotter and drier than the brazen hinges of hell. This sun here has 7, but number 2, Cavenda they call it, is the only Tellurian planet in the system. The first thing we look for is a big, diamond-shaped continent. There's only one of that shape. There it is, over there. Notice that one end is bigger than the other. That end is north. Strike a line to split the continent in two, and measure from the north end 1/3 of the length of the line. That's the point we're diving at now. See that crater? Yes. The Virgin Queen, although still hundreds of miles up, was slowing rapidly. It must be a big one. It's a good 50 miles across. Go down until you're dead sure that the box will land somewhere inside the rim of that crater. Then dump it. The parachute and the sender are automatic. Understand? Yes, sir, I understand. And Samms took off. He was vastly more interested in the stars, however, than in delivering the broadleaf. The constellation directly beyond Sol from wherever he was might be recognizable. Its shape would be smaller and more or less distorted. Its smaller stars, brilliant to earthly eyes only because of their nearness, would be dimmer, perhaps invisible. The picture would be further confused by intervening, nearby, brilliant strangers. But such giants as Canopus and Rigel and Betelgeuse and Deneb would certainly be highly visible if he could only recognize them. From Trenco his search had failed, but he was still trying. There was something vaguely familiar. Sweating with the mental effort, he blocked out the too near, too bright stars and studied intensively those that were left. A blue-white and a red were most prominent. Rigel and Betelgeuse? Could that constellation be Orion? The belt was fairly faint, but it was there. Then Sirius ought to be about there, and Pollux about there, and at this distance about equally bright. They were. Aldebaran would be orange and about 1 magnitude brighter than Pollux, and Capella would be yellow and half a magnitude brighter still. There they were. Not too close to where they should be, but close enough. It was Orion. And this Thionite way station, then, was somewhere near right ascension 17 hours and declination plus 10 degrees. He returned to the Virgin Queen. She blasted off. Samms asked very few questions, and Willoughby volunteered very little information. Nevertheless, the First Lensman learned more than anyone of his fellow pirates would have believed possible. Aloof, taciturn, disinterested to a degree, he seemed to spend practically all of his time in his cabin when he was not actually at work. But he kept his eyes and his ears wide open. And Virgil Samms, as has been intimated, had a brain. The Virgin Queen made a quick flit from Cavenda to Vegia, arriving exactly on time. A proud, clean spaceship, as high above suspicion as Calpurnia herself. Samms unloaded her cargo, replaced it with one for Earth. She was serviced. She made a fast, eventless run to Tellus. She docked at New York Spaceport. Virgil Samms walked unconcernedly into an ordinary-looking restroom. George Olmsted, fully informed, walked unconcernedly out. As soon as he could, Samms lensed Northrop and Jack Kinnison. "We lined up 1,001 signals, sir," Northrop reported for the pair, "but only one of them carried a message, and it didn't make sense." "Why not?" Samms asked sharply. "With a lens, any kind of a message, however garbled, coded, or interrupted, makes sense." "Oh, we understood what it said," Jack came in, "but it didn't say enough. Just ready, 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 over and over." "What?" Samms exclaimed, and the boys could feel his mind work. "Did that signal, by any chance, originate anywhere near 17 hours and plus 10 degrees?" "Very near. Why? How did you know?" "Then it does make sense," Samms exclaimed, and called a general conference of Lensmen. "Keep working along these same lines," Samms directed finally. "Keep Ray Olmsted in the Hill in my place. I am going to Pluto, and, I hope, to Pallane 7. Roderick Kinnison, of course, protested, but equally, of course, his protests were overruled.